Captain Riley Martinez stared at the chrome and crystal monstrosity that was the Galactic Council's Interspecies Cooperation Academy and wondered, not for the first time, what she'd done to deserve this assignment. Probably that incident with the Zephyrian ambassador and the airlock. In her defense, he had it coming. The academy looked like someone had taken a luxury resort and fed it through a translator app 17 times. Everything was too shiny, too smooth, and too perfectly designed for beings who apparently had never heard of corners. Riley's combat boots echoed obnoxiously on the polished floors as she made her way to classroom Delta 7, where she was supposed to teach human combat psychology and tactical applications to a bunch of aliens who thought humans were one step above trained monkeys. She paused outside the door, checking her tablet one more time. Commander Vex, Reptilian Strategic Command. Lieutenant Cora, Hive Mind Tactical Corps. General Thorne, Ursine Heavy Infantry Division. And 12 other representatives from species that could bench press small vehicles and had been winning wars since before humans discovered fire. Riley straightened her uniform, put on her best customer service smile, and walked into what was clearly going to be the most condescending room in the galaxy. The classroom fell silent as she entered. Vex, a 7-foot-tall lizard with more military decorations than a Christmas tree, didn't even look up from his holographic display. Cora's compound eyes tracked Riley's movement with the kind of disinterest usually reserved for watching paint dry. Thorne, who looked like someone had crossed a grizzly bear with a main battle tank, actually chuckled. "So, Riley said, setting her bag down on the instructor's desk, "I'm Captain Martinez, and I'll be your instructor for the next 3 months. I know what you're all thinking. What could this little human possibly teach us about warfare? After all, you've got natural armor, enhanced strength, tactical superiority, and military traditions dating back millennia." She looked around the room at the various nods and smug expressions. Meanwhile, humans are these squishy pink things that only stopped hitting each other with sticks about 5 minutes ago in galactic terms. More nods. Vex finally looked up, his reptilian features arranged in what might charitably be called a smile. "Captain Martinez, with all due respect to your species' recent successes, we are here merely to fulfill a diplomatic requirement. Our militaries have protocols and traditions that have served us well for centuries." "Oh, absolutely," Riley said, pulling up a chair and sitting backwards on it like she was addressing a kindergarten class. "I'm sure they have. Tell me, how did those protocols work out during the Kepler incident?" The room got very quiet. The Kepler incident was still classified, but everyone in this room had security clearance. It was also the engagement where a single human frigate had held off an entire reptilian battle group for 6 hours using nothing but mining equipment and what the official reports called aggressive improvisation. "That was an anomaly," Cora said, her mandibles clicking in what Riley had learned was the insectoid equivalent of clearing one's throat. "Human tactics are unorthodox. They lack the precision and discipline required for proper military engagement." "Unorthodox," Riley repeated, making a note on her tablet. "I like that. What else?" General Thorne leaned back in his reinforced chair, which groaned ominously under his weight. "Your species fights with emotion rather than logic. It's admirable in its own primitive way, but hardly suitable for modern warfare." "Primitive." Riley wrote that down too. "Anything else?" For the next 20 minutes, her students gleefully explained everything wrong with human military doctrine. They had charts. They had statistics. They had detailed analyses proving that humans ranked dead last in every measurable combat category except creative use of available resources, and refusal to acknowledge tactical disadvantage. Riley nodded and smiled and took notes, occasionally asking questions that seemed designed to let them elaborate on just how inferior human methods were. By the end of the session, the aliens were practically glowing with superiority. "Well, Mil," she said finally, standing and gathering her materials, "this has been illuminating. I can see we have a lot of work to do for tomorrow. I want you all to participate in a simple team-building exercise. There's a wilderness preserve attached to the academy. Spend one night camping. Nothing dangerous, just a chance to bond and enjoy nature." The aliens exchanged glances that clearly said what a waste of time, but they nodded agreement. "Oh, and dress comfortably," Riley added as they filed out. "It's going to be educational." The next morning, Riley walked into a classroom that looked like the aftermath of a military contractor's wet dream. Her students had arrived armed with enough technology to terraform a small moon. Vex had a portable command center. Cora brought what appeared to be a tactical analysis suite. Thorn had packed enough firepower to level a city block. "Good morning, class," Riley said cheerfully, noting that several of them looked like they hadn't slept. "How was the camping trip?" The silence was deafening. "I take it you had some challenges?" she continued, pulling up a holographic display. "Let's start with you, Commander Vex. How did your evening go?" Vex's scales had shifted to a mottled gray color that Riley was pretty sure meant either embarrassment or murderous rage, possibly both. The local fauna proved more adaptable than anticipated. Adaptable. That's one way to put it. Riley tapped her tablet, and bang, a video feed appeared showing Vex's elaborate defensive perimeter being systematically dismantled by what humans would generously call a family of trash pandas. For those keeping score at home, that's a reptilian strategic commander with 300 years of military experience being outmaneuvered by mammals with a brain roughly the size of a walnut. She turned to Cora, whose compound eyes were definitely glowing with what Riley had learned was barely suppressed homicidal fury. "Lieutenant, I see your tactical formation held up well against local wildlife." The next video showed Cora's perfectly coordinated unit scattering in 12 different directions when confronted by a single skunk. A skunk that, based on the timestamp, had wandered into their camp purely by accident while looking for garbage. "And General Thorn," Riley continued, barely suppressing a grin, "I have to ask, how's the view from up there?" The final video showed the 8-foot-tall, half-ton general clinging to a tree branch like an oversized cat, having been chased there by a black bear that was probably more confused than aggressive. "In my defense," Thorn rumbled, his dignity in tatters, "that creature was clearly engineered for combat." "Actually, that was Gerald," Riley said. "He's about 15 years old, and mostly deaf. The park rangers relocated him from Yellowstone because he kept getting into tourist coolers. He's basically a garbage disposal with anxiety issues." She walked to the front of the class, hands clasped behind her back like she was addressing new recruits. "So let's recap. 3 of the galaxy's most decorated military officers, representing species that have conquered star systems, were defeated by a raccoon, a skunk, and a geriatric bear. Anyone want to guess what went wrong?" "The intelligence briefing was inadequate," Vex said stiffly. "We lacked proper reconnaissance on local species," Cora added. "The tactical environment was poorly defined," Thorn concluded. Riley nodded thoughtfully. "Those are all very military answers. Very proper. Very by the book. And they're all completely wrong." She pulled up a new display showing her own campsite from the same night. While her students had been building fortifications and setting up sensor nets, Riley had laid out a simple tarp, built a small fire, and gone to sleep under the stars. The problem wasn't intelligence or reconnaissance or tactical environment. The problem is that you approached an Earth ecosystem like it was a military engagement. You tried to dominate it instead of adapting to it. You built walls instead of learning the terrain. You treated every creature like an enemy instead of understanding their motivations. She paused, letting that sink in. The raccoons weren't trying to breach your perimeter, Vex. They were trying to get to your food because you set up camp next to their highway to the garbage bins. The skunk didn't attack your formation, Cora. You surrounded its den and it panicked. And Thorn. Gerald didn't chase you up that tree because he's aggressive. He chased you because you smelled like fish and he was curious. The classroom was dead silent. This is why human tactics confuse you. We don't try to impose military doctrine on chaos. We adapt to it. We work with it. We use it. She smiled, and there was something predatory in it now. We learned a long time ago that the universe doesn't care about your battle plans. She tapped her tablet again. Tonight's assignment is the same. One more night in the preserve. But this time I want you to try thinking like humans instead of like soldiers. And what if we refuse? Vex asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Riley's smile got wider. Oh, Commander, you're absolutely free to refuse. But just remember, if you can't handle one night with Gerald and some raccoons, how exactly are you planning to handle actual combat against humans? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Class dismissed. Riley settled into her monitoring station with a cup of coffee and a bag of popcorn. The Academy's Wilderness Preserve was actually a carefully controlled environment designed to simulate various planetary conditions, but for the past month, she'd been slowly adjusting it to match Earth-standard wilderness. Not the dangerous stuff, mind you. Just the regular, everyday Earth wilderness that humans had been living in for millennia. Her students had no idea what they were in for. Through the surveillance feeds, she watched them deploy with military precision. Vex had learned from his previous encounter and brought smaller, more mobile equipment. Cora had traded her formation tactics for what looked like guerrilla warfare protocols. Thorn had somehow acquired what appeared to be a portable fortress. Riley keyed her comm unit. Good evening, students. I'll be monitoring your progress tonight and providing educational commentary. Think of me as your friendly neighborhood narrator. At 2:47 a.m., the educational commentary began. Oh, Vex, buddy, Riley said into her microphone as she watched the reptilian commander frantically trying to reorganize his supplies. I hate to break it to you, but those aren't enemy sappers infiltrating your perimeter. Those are opossums. They're literally too stupid to be afraid of you. And they think your ration packs smell interesting. Through his comm, she could hear Vex hissing something in his native language that the translator helpfully rendered as untranslatable profanity, marsupials. Fun fact, Riley continued, taking a sip of coffee. Opossums have been around for about 70 million years. They survived the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. They're basically nature's way of saying good enough is good enough. Also, they eat ticks, so you're welcome for the pest control. Meanwhile, Cora was discovering that her new guerrilla tactics worked great against sentient opponents, but fell apart completely when faced with a confused raccoon family that had wandered into her campsite and decided her backpack was a puzzle box that might contain snacks. Lieutenant, Riley said helpfully, you might want to check the storage compartments on that tactical vest. Raccoons have basically evolved to open anything that isn't welded shut. They're like tiny, furry safe crackers with ADHD. The sound coming through Cora's comm suggested she had just discovered exactly how true that was. But the real entertainment was General Thorn, who had built what amounted to a military bunker complete with sensor arrays and defensive systems. Riley watched with increasing amusement as the general's massive fortification was systematically investigated by Gerald the Bear, who had apparently decided that anything this interesting needed thorough sniffing. General, I really hate to interrupt your tactical planning, but Gerald's about to figure out how to open your supply cache. He's actually pretty smart for a walking garbage disposal. Last summer he learned how to open car doors. How is that possible? Thorn's voice crackled through the comm. These are military-grade security systems. Yeah, well, Gerald doesn't know they're military-grade. He just knows they make interesting clicking sounds when he pushes them. Riley paused as Gerald, through what appeared to be pure trial and error, managed to trigger the cache's opening mechanism. Also, you might want to know that those emergency rations you brought, they're fish-flavored protein bars, Gerald's favorite. The camera feed showed 8 feet and half a ton of trained military officers scrambling up the nearest tree as Gerald claimed his prize. You know what the really funny part is? Riley said into the comm as dawn broke over the preserve. I've been sleeping about 50 meters from all of you this entire time, under a tarp, with no equipment. The raccoons brought me half a sandwich around midnight. I'm pretty sure it was a peace offering. She could practically feel their collective disbelief through the communications array. See, here's the thing about Earth ecosystems. They're not trying to kill you. They're just trying to live their lives. Raccoons want food and interesting problems to solve. Opossums want to eat garbage and be left alone. Bears want fish and berries, and maybe a nice sunny spot for a nap. She paused to take another sip of coffee. The only dangerous thing in these woods is me, and I'm only dangerous if you give me a reason to be. The calm fell silent except for the sounds of her students slowly extracting themselves from their various predicaments. Breakfast is in an hour, Riley said cheerfully. We have a lot to discuss. The classroom looked like the aftermath of a small war. Vex's scales had dulled to a muddy brown that Riley was pretty sure meant existential crisis. Cora's compound eyes kept darting around like she was expecting another raccoon ambush. Thorne sat slumped in his chair, occasionally muttering what sounded like prayers in his native language. All right, class, Riley said, pulling up a holographic display. Let's talk about why human primitive aggression is actually the most sophisticated combat psychology in the galaxy. She gestured to her bedraggled students. But first, let's address the elephant in the room. Or in this case, the opossum, the raccoon, and Gerald. You're all accomplished military officers. You've conquered worlds. You've commanded fleets. And you just spent 2 nights getting schooled by Earth's junior varsity wildlife. Those creatures are clearly more dangerous than initially reported, Vex said defensively. No, Commander, they're not. They're exactly as dangerous as reported, which is not at all, unless you're a garbage can. Riley pulled up a biological analysis chart. An opossum mass is about 4 kilograms. A raccoon tops out around 9 kilograms. Gerald weighs maybe 140 kilograms, which makes him smaller than General Thorne's left leg. She let that sink in. So what went wrong? I'll tell you what went wrong. You approached the situation like rational military officers. You made logical tactical decisions based on available intelligence. You followed established protocols. Riley's smile was sharp as a knife. And that's exactly why you failed. Because humans don't do any of that. She tapped her tablet and the display shifted to show historical human conflicts. Let me introduce you to the human approach to warfare. We call it malicious compliance with reality. The first image showed a World War II photograph. 1940. Battle of Britain. The German Luftwaffe has more planes, better technology, and superior tactical doctrine. By every rational measure, Britain should have been conquered in a matter of weeks. The next image showed RAF pilots scrambling to their fighters. But humans don't care about rational measures. The British looked at those odds and said, okay, but have you considered that we're really, really stubborn? They turned their entire island into a fortress, fought with everything they had, and when they ran out of military aircraft, they started using crop dusters and training planes. Vex leaned forward slightly, but surely superior numbers would eventually. Oh, they absolutely should have, Riley interrupted. By every military model you can imagine, the Germans should have won. But here's what your models don't account for. Humans get more dangerous when we're losing. She pulled up combat statistics. Most species become less effective as casualties mount. Morale breaks down, tactical efficiency decreases, survival instinct overrides military discipline. Humans do the opposite. The worse things get, the more creative we become. The display showed footage from more recent conflicts. Afghanistan, 2003. Human coalition forces are fighting an insurgency that knows the terrain better, has local support, and can blend into the civilian population. Classic asymmetric warfare scenario. Should have been unwinnable for conventional forces. And yet, Cora said, her mandibles clicking thoughtfully, human forces maintained operational effectiveness for over a decade. Because we learned to fight like the insurgents, Riley said. We didn't try to impose our military doctrine on their environment. We adapted to it. We learned their tactics and then improved on them. We turned their own strategies against them. She pulled up more data. Vietnam. Korea. The Eastern Front in World War II. Every time humans face impossible odds, we do the same thing. We don't surrender. We don't retreat. We figure out how to make the impossible work anyway. General Thorne stirred in his chair. But that's not sustainable. Military doctrine exists for a reason. Chain of command, tactical protocols, rules of engagement. All of which go out the window the moment real combat starts, Riley finished. You know what humans call a battle plan? A good starting point. You know what we call tactics? Guidelines? You know what we call impossible odds? She paused for dramatic effect. Tuesday. The classroom was dead silent. See, here's what you don't understand about human psychology. We don't fight to win. We fight because losing is unacceptable. There's a difference. Riley began pacing in front of the holographic display. Winning implies that there's an acceptable level of loss. Losing being unacceptable means we'll sacrifice everything before we quit. She pulled up one final set of images. Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943. German forces have superior equipment, better supply lines, and tactical advantage. The city is surrounded, cut off, and mostly destroyed. By any rational measure, the defenders should surrender. The images showed rubble-strewn streets and desperate fighting. Instead, the defenders decided that every building was a fortress, every street was a battlefield, and every piece of debris was a weapon. They fought in basements, in sewers, in ruins that barely qualified as structures. They made the Germans pay for every meter with blood. The siege lasted 200 days. When it was over, the German Sixth Army had been completely destroyed. Not defeated. Destroyed. Because the defenders refused to accept that losing was an option. Riley turned back to her students. That camping trip you just endured? That was me being nice. That was the safe version of Earth wilderness. The kind where the most dangerous thing you might encounter is a confused bear with anxiety issues. She leaned against her desk. Real Earth wilderness would have killed all of you by sundown on the first day. Not because it's malicious, but because it's completely indifferent to your survival. And humans learn to thrive in that environment using nothing but stubbornness and pattern recognition. The silence stretched until Vex finally spoke. So human tactical doctrine is what? Refuse to lose and improvise? Riley's grin was positively predatory. Now you're getting it. We don't have tactical doctrine. We have tactical philosophy. Figure out what works, do more of that, and never, ever quit. Tomorrow, she said, gathering her materials, we're going to put that philosophy to the test. Riley stood in the center of what the Academy generously called a tactical simulation environment, which looked suspiciously like an abandoned city district complete with buildings, vehicles, and enough hiding spots to make a guerrilla fighter weep with joy. Her students approached with the kind of confidence that came from 3 months of intensive training in human combat psychology. They'd learned about persistence hunting, spite as a tactical advantage, and the fine art of making the universe bend to your will through sheer bloody-mindedness. All right, class, Riley announced through the public address system. Time for your final exam. You need to capture or neutralize a single human combatant using everything you've learned about our tactical philosophy. X, now sporting adaptive camouflage gear that could probably fool a satellite, nodded confidently. 1 human against 15 of us? With respect, Captain, this seems disproportionate. Oh, I agree completely, Riley said cheerfully. It's totally unfair. Cora's compound eyes glittered with what Riley had learned to recognize as tactical anticipation. What are the engagement parameters? Simple. Non-lethal weapons only. The simulation ends when you either capture me or I neutralize all of you. You have full access to your equipment, communications, and tactical coordination. Riley paused. I have whatever I can find lying around. General Thorne, who had spent the last week studying human urban warfare techniques, looked around the environment with new appreciation. And the time limit? Oh, there isn't one. We keep going until someone wins. Riley's smile was pure predatory satisfaction. Fair warning, though. I've been live streaming this exercise to your respective military academies back home. You know, for educational purposes. The collective what that echoed through the simulation area was deeply satisfying. Don't worry, Riley continued, already moving toward the edge of the combat zone. I'm sure you'll do fine. After all, You've learned to think like humans now. How hard could it be? She disappeared into the urban maze before they could respond. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. Vex established a command post and began systematic area denial. Cora deployed her units in overlapping search patterns. Thorn set up heavy weapons positions to control the major thoroughfares. It was textbook perfect. It was tactically sound. It was everything their military academies had taught them about urban warfare. Which was exactly when Riley started breaking every rule in those textbooks. The first sign that things were going sideways came when Vex's command post started receiving reports that weren't quite right. Units reporting clear sectors that other units swore they'd already searched. Confirmed sightings that turned out to be shadows. Equipment malfunctions that seemed suspiciously coincidental. She's using our communications against us, Vex reported to the others, his voice tight with frustration. Somehow she's intercepting and spoofing our tactical network. Meanwhile, Cora was discovering that her overlapping search patterns had a fatal flaw. They assumed the target was trying to avoid detection. Riley wasn't avoiding anything. She was actively hunting the search teams, picking them off one by one with jury-rigged traps that shouldn't have worked but absolutely did. How did she even make that? Cora demanded, staring at the remains of what had once been a perfectly good sensor drone and was now an abstract art piece scattered across 3 city blocks. That's not a weapon. That's improvised ordnance made from garbage. It's creative problem-solving, came Riley's voice through the comm system, somehow cheerful despite the circumstances. I found a construction site, some electrical components, and a vending machine. The rest was just applied physics and spite. General Thorn was having his own problems. His heavy weapons positions were being systematically neutralized by an opponent who seemed to treat line of sight and effective range as suggestions, rather than limitations. Somehow, Riley had turned the entire urban environment into a weapon. She's not fighting us, he reported, his voice filled with what might have been admiration if it weren't for the circumstances. She's making the city fight us. Every building is a trap. Every street is an ambush. Every piece of debris is a potential weapon. That's the idea, General. Riley's voice crackled through their comms again. You wanted to learn human tactics? Here's lesson 1. The environment is always on your side if you're creative enough. By hour 3, the carefully coordinated alien assault had devolved into something approaching chaos. Riley wasn't just defeating them. She was conducting a masterclass in asymmetric warfare using nothing but urban debris and a complete disregard for conventional tactical wisdom. She'd turned a parking garage into a funhouse of mirrors and misdirection. She'd booby-trapped an entire office building using nothing but office supplies and construction equipment. She'd somehow convinced the building's automated systems that her students were intruders who needed to be politely but firmly escorted out. This is impossible. Vex snarled into his comm, nursing what would probably be a spectacular bruise where a malfunctioning door had caught him in the ribs. She can't be everywhere at once. She's not everywhere at once, Cora replied, her tactical analysis protocols finally catching up to reality. She's making us think she is. Every trap, every ambush, every misdirection is designed to make us overestimate her capabilities. Psychological warfare, Thorn added grudgingly. She's not trying to defeat us militarily. She's trying to defeat us mentally. Bingo. Riley's voice echoed from speakers throughout the simulation area. And judging by the tactical chatter I've been monitoring, it's working. You're second-guessing every decision, seeing threats that aren't there, and wasting resources on problems I didn't even create. There was a pause, and when Riley spoke again, her tone had shifted from cheerful to something much more serious. This is what human combat psychology looks like in practice. We don't fight fair. We don't follow rules. We turn everything around us into an advantage and make our enemies fight the entire universe instead of just us. Another pause. Also, Vex, you might want to check the structural integrity of that building you're using as a command post. I may have gotten creative with some load-bearing supports. The sound of 15 alien military officers abandoning their positions simultaneously was, Riley reflected, deeply educational. By hour 4, her students had regrouped in the center of the simulation area, forming a defensive circle that would have made their instructors proud. It was tactically sound, mutually supporting, and completely hopeless. Riley materialized from what should have been empty air, covered in dust and grinning like someone who had just discovered the universe's best-kept secret. Congratulations, class. You've just experienced human tactical philosophy in action. How? Was all Vex managed to say. Maintenance tunnels, Riley said cheerfully. Turns out city planners think about things like utility access and emergency evacuation routes. Who knew? She looked around at her thoroughly defeated students. So, what did we learn today? The silence was deafening. Come on, don't be shy. This is the educational part. Finally, General Thorne spoke up. Humans don't fight battles. They fight wars. Riley pointed at him like he'd just solved a particularly difficult math problem. Explain. Every engagement is part of a larger strategy. You weren't trying to defeat us in individual encounters. You were shaping the entire battle space to your advantage. Thorne's massive frame seemed to slump slightly. We were fighting 15 separate battles. You were fighting one war. And? Riley prompted. Cora's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. You made us fight your fight instead of our fight. Every tactical advantage we had became a liability because you changed the rules of engagement. Keep going. Vex, his scales now a deep purple that Riley was pretty sure meant philosophical revelation, looked up from where he was sitting in the rubble. You didn't defeat superior numbers and technology. You made numbers and technology irrelevant. Riley nodded slowly. And that, class, is why humanity doesn't get invaded. Not because we're physically superior, but because fighting us means fighting on our terms by our rules in an environment we control. She paused. And our rules are that there are no rules. She looked around at the devastated simulation area, at her thoroughly humbled students, at the camera feeds that were still broadcasting to military academies across the galaxy. Class dismissed. Same time tomorrow. We'll be working on advanced psychological warfare techniques. As her students limped away, Riley could hear Vex muttering something that the translator rendered as "I need a career change." 3 months later, Captain Riley Martinez stood in front of the Galactic Military Academy's main auditorium, looking out at an audience of military brass from 17 different species. Her students, former students, she supposed, sat in the front row, looking like they'd aged several years in the space of a single semester. Ladies, gentlemen, and then non-binary entities, Riley began, activating the holographic display behind her. I'm here today to present the results of the first human combat psychology training program. The display showed before and after tactical assessments. The improvement was dramatic. Commander Vex has successfully implemented adaptive psychological warfare techniques in 3 separate engagements, resulting in victory, despite numerical disadvantage in each case. Riley nodded toward the reptilian officer, whose scales had settled into a confident green that suggested he'd found his groove. His report on creative problem-solving under fire has been distributed to strategic commands across the galaxy. Lieutenant Cora has pioneered new approaches to asymmetric warfare that have been adopted by the Hive Mind Tactical Corps as standard doctrine. Cora's compound eyes practically glowed with pride. Her innovation in environmental weaponization has reduced casualty rates in urban combat scenarios by 37%. And General Thorne has developed what he calls managed chaos theory, which involves deliberately introducing variables that force enemy forces to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. Thorne nodded gravely, having apparently embraced his role as a scholar of controlled anarchy. Riley gestured to the broader audience. The program has been so successful that we've received requests from 43 different military academies to implement similar training, which brings me to an important announcement. She paused for dramatic effect, noting the nervous tension that had settled over the auditorium. I've been promoted to Director of Interspecies Tactical Education, which means I'll be overseeing the expansion of this program galaxy-wide. The collective intake of breath was audible. But don't worry, Riley continued with a smile that was somehow both reassuring and terrifying. The basic curriculum will remain the same. We'll start with camping trips and work our way up to full-scale tactical simulation. She could see several high-ranking officers in the audience making notes that probably said things like volunteer someone else for this assignment. The key to understanding human combat psychology, Riley said, shifting into lecture mode, isn't learning our specific tactics or techniques. Those change constantly based on circumstances. The key is learning our mindset, that every problem has a solution, every disadvantage can become an advantage, and losing is simply not an option. She looked directly at the camera that was broadcasting this presentation across the Galactic communication network. This is why, despite our physical limitations and technological disadvantages, humanity continues to be a major military force in galactic politics. It's not because we're stronger or smarter or better equipped. Her smile became predatory. It's because we're willing to turn the entire universe into a weapon if that's what it takes to win. The presentation ended, and Riley walked off the stage to polite applause that sounded distinctly nervous. Later, as she was setting up her new office, her tablet chimed with an incoming message. The sender was listed as Galactic Intelligence Coordination. Captain Martinez, the message read, "We've been monitoring your training program with great interest. We have a proposition that we think you'll find intriguing. Please report to classified location Alpha 7 at your earliest convenience. Bring camping gear." Riley grinned and started packing. Some lessons, apparently, never ended.